Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. So first, please enter all questions in the Q&A so Jenna and Farrah can go through and we can answer them. They can answer those. I am glad to see all of you here. This particular session for me was very interesting because as your technology footprint grows, prioritizing work brings stability and transparency to stakeholders on the team, and it is hard to get done. So please let me introduce you to Farrah and Jena, who are solving this at the University of St. Thomas.
All right, thank you, Dan. We are trying. I think we're making great headway, but I don't know if the problem is ever completely solved. My name is Farrah Friedrich. I'm the Enterprise CRM Director at the University of St. Thomas, and I'm also on the Higher Ed Advisory Council. And I'm presenting with Jena Zangs, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Yes, I'm Jena Zangs. I'm the Chief Data and Analytics Officer and the AVP for Data Analytics and CRM, and very thankful for all of you who are here.
So as I said, we're from the University of St. Thomas, and especially this time of year, we like to remind people not the island. We are from the other one, and we got about 6 inches of snow yesterday in the Twin Cities. So yeah, it looks a lot like that right now. So we are a private institution, and here are some of the stats about our university. We have 100% of classes taught by faculty. The average class size is about 21. And what's not on the slide is we are, I think, at about, 9,000 students, which is a pretty great campus.
Yeah, and we are the only school to go from a D3 athletics to a D1, so that has been very fun all around for our technology stack to adapt to the new demands.
So in this session, we're going to go through our Salesforce journey, talk about some of the bumps in the road, talk about the request process, how it was, what it is now, talk about some of our resources and roles, how we define and scope work, our steering committee, which has been great, and then touch on how we're handling sprint planning. So it has been a long and winding road, and we like to say that sometimes it's the journey that teaches you about the destination, and we have learned a lot. So on the next slide, here's kind of a map of where we started. We did kick off with Salesforce in 2014 with a managed package focused on enrollment, but with a vision for full student life cycle. We launched grad enrollment in 2016, undergrad enrollment in 2017, and at the same time, we also launched a 2-year college at the institution, so we got to slip that in with everything else. And that's when HEDA was announced just a little bit before that, so we rolled HEDA into our existing org. And then in 2018, we felt like we had outgrown that managed package, so we made the decision to create a new org on the EDA educational data architecture, where we started building out alumni and advancement before transitioning everyone else over. And we also officially launched our university event management system called Summit Events, which is an open source package that I think some of you may have heard of. And then in 2022, so like between 2018 and 2022, we made that migration of building in the new org and then transitioning folks over. And so now we are full student lifecycle in that environment, using a lot of different products. But we went live with undergrad and grad enrollment in 2022, which was a huge lift, getting off of that managed package and building on the easy application that Kathy Lukeman had worked on that was an open source package. And then we also built out student success. So again, the full student life cycle was in that org. And then here's just an overview of our architecture in that org. We do have a lot of different clouds. So we have Experience Cloud, which is what our applicant portal is built on. And then we have an alumni directory also built on Experience Cloud. And we are just launching in the next couple weeks some current student support stuff in Experience Cloud as well. Not everything. We still have other products on campus for that. But we also have Marketing Cloud and Pardot. We heavily use Qualtrics with a Salesforce integration. We have about 80 folks using Schedule Once with Salesforce to create student appointments. And then we are using Banner, Lucian Banner as our SIS currently, with Jitterbit as our ETL tool. And who we support. With the full student lifecycle, we have a lot of people. So we have about 665, that number fluctuates, of active staff and faculty users, including some student staff. And then we average about 20,000 a month of Experience Cloud community logins.
I think, yeah. So as we've been going through and our ecosystem continues to expand, we saw our backlog continue to get bigger. So you see this huge mountain in the background, right? Which we don't want our stakeholders to necessarily know, but we want to create some organized expectations around what's happening, and it was so loud. So a lot of the things that we were hearing from the stakeholders were they didn't have any type of lack of ownership. They weren't really involved. They would tell us everything they wanted to tell us, but yet they didn't really have a say or a discussion point other than just telling us what they were looking for. We got this perception that they felt like nothing was getting done, even though we had this huge backlog that we were addressing every single day. And then the question of, what are they working on, right? So it was very eye-opening for the team to continue to address these stakeholder perceptions right away. And then on the flip side, we have our internal teams, where everything feels like it's a number one priority. And my favorite is the middle one, where everything, this request has one sentence, how am I supposed to make magic out of this? And then the feeling like nothing is organized, right? So it's very overwhelming. You're coming into work feeling like, oh gosh, it's another day when we wanted to evolve and change this. And the team is doing amazing addressing all these. So we saw there was a lot of opportunity for us, and so then Farrah and I decided to split and tag team. So I really focused on the stakeholder pieces, and then Farrah focused on the backlog mountain that you saw in that original picture. So it's been a really fun journey for us as we continue to move forward. So Farrah's going to talk about the first steps that we took.
Yep. So we had to figure out a better way or a better job of managing our requests and our backlog. We were using Jira, but our process wasn't as defined. We had different variations that we had worked with assorted vendors in the past to help us get it set up. But I spent a lot of time initially just looking at our request process and how we were managing that backlog. And I also wanted to keep it simple, right? So our original process was sometimes we would get requests through email, sometimes they would come through Teams chat, sometimes they would be phone calls or spin out of a meeting. We would sometimes get tickets. They were coming in a lot of different ways. But what we really needed to get to was two places. We wanted them all as a ticket or in Jira. And so here is my very simplified rule, and anybody on my team will probably hear me echoing in the back of their head constantly to put it in Jira. But the gist is, if we're going to work on it, it pretty much needs to be in Jira. So the rule we go by is if it's going to take more than 2 hours to complete, or if it modifies any code, flow, or metadata, it needs to be in Jira so that there's visibility and we have that cataloged somewhere. So then the other piece was trying to figure out who the roles were and the resources that are doing the work. And this was really key because there was this idea that when stuff would come into our team, that everybody could do the same thing. And as I'll show on the next slide, we have a lot of different people involved in keeping Salesforce running on our campus. So the folks on the left are the dedicated resources for CRM. Whoops.
Sorry. There we go.
So we have 4 admins, 2 developers, and 3 student interns currently, and that's the dedicated CRM team. But we also have a communication systems team. So they're managing Marketing Cloud and Pardot and other communication systems for campus. So we work closely with them. But then at the same time, we leverage more of like a shared model of resources on campus. So when we were going through the migration, that was something that in the old org, the CRM team was really managing everything, and that just wasn't working, especially as we were growing as much as we were. And we wanted to make sure that we were able to be more dynamic and agile in what we were doing and scalable because, again, we were growing a lot. So we pulled in what I like to think of as a shared services model. So the CRM team is no longer owning building reports and dashboards in Salesforce. That's done by the institutional data analytics and reporting team. They know campus data. They know Salesforce data. They are the best ones to be working with stakeholders and building the reports. The CRM team is also not managing the day-to-day data operations. We're not doing data loads. We're not doing data cleanup and monitoring and audit reports. That's being mainly done by our student data and registrar's office, but then we also have an enrollment tech team that's sharing that responsibility. So I won't read through all of these things, but the gist is we're leveraging teams that already exist on campus that know and are experts in those different roles and not expecting the CRM team to be able to wear all of those hats and be experts at it. I won't read through all of these. I wanted to include them so you'd have them for later, but these are just really a high-level overview of what we define the different roles as. So when a request comes in, we're assigning one of these roles to the tasks that fall into that item of work. And that way we're able to do better resource allocation, which we'll show later. So then defining and scoping our work. Again, I'm not going to read through all of this because it's a lot of words, but the gist is I wanted to make sure that everyone was on the same page. So I have a knowledge base article where we have all of this defined so everyone can see exactly what we're talking about. When I talk about a task or an epic or a story point, these are the definitions for those.
And part of when we were making this presentation, we wanted to make sure you had something to like take back with you and actually, execute right away and have all the details that you needed to make it as best as possible for next week or tomorrow.
Yeah. All right. So if you want to go to the next slide. So this is really the part that helped me manage our backlog. Stories were coming in and they would be sitting in this just massive list, right, in the backlog. And so I sort of hacked Jira in a way that probably it's not supposed to be. And I set up these buckets as different sprints. And so as we're working through the process, we're moving a story through. So when we first hear of something or there's an idea for work, it'll go into the BA review bucket and it will sit there and we scan that and work through some of that work. And then we have BAs that we work with that'll also be updating those stories. And once we know that we have all the requirements and we know what work needs to be done, then we'll advance it to the needs CRM review. And so that is where the CRM team looks at it and decides, is there enough information for us to build it? Because sometimes we get a story and they think that there is and there isn't. So we might ask questions or kick that back to get more details. But that's where we actually break out that story or that request into subtasks and say, okay, this is what needs to get done for this, and a developer needs to do this, and it's going to take this much time, and so on and so forth. So we break out every task into those subtasks and assign a role and provide story points. And then once we've done that, sometimes also we might get one and look at it and it's massive. So then we'll break it up into separate stories. Or we might find that they're requesting something very specific and we have an idea to make the functionality to build it so that it could be used for multiple purposes. And so we might create a story for that and then have their story be a related one that would be for their specific use case. But anyway, once we do that, then we move it up to needs prioritization. And that's the bucket of stories that the steering committee looks at, and they will prioritize which ones we work on, which we'll talk about in a minute how that works. But then once it gets prioritized for a sprint, then we move it into the sprint backlog. And so that's a bucket for that sprint that the CRM team knows is approved for them to work on in a given sprint. And then when they're looking for a story to work on, they can go grab one and move it into the sprint. So what's actually in the sprint is what's currently being worked on. So here's that more definition again. I won't read through these slides, but we wanted to include them so that you could come back to them as a reference later. But this talks in more detail about those different buckets. And on this next slide, this is actually our, we don't use this as much anymore because we kind of know after being in it for a while, but this is what we initially used to estimate story points for each of the different types of subtasks. And so that's something that's different. And I'll show that on a future slide, is we don't actually scope the overall story or request. We actually scope the subtasks and assign roles to the subtasks. And then I have roll-ups in Jira that will summarize. So on the story, you will see a total of story points, but then you'll also see a breakdown of story points by role. And again, that's so I can appropriately guess how much work we can take on for the upcoming sprint. So here is a more detailed look at what we see in Jira. So we've scoped the subtasks, and so then we have a roll-up of story points. So in this case, the story has a total of 11 points. 1 point is admin, and then advanced admin, which is what we call flow work. So it's 10 points. So the story is majority advanced admin work. And again, here's more definition on the other buckets. And then as far as stories go, when we're working on them, they come in as requested. So that means it's approved by the steering committee and ready to work on. Once we take ownership and we're working on it, we flip the status to in development. Then when we're done doing the developer work and we're handing it off for testing, we'll change the status to in UAT. And then once we get approval that testing has gone well and it's ready to move, then we'll move it to ready deploy. But if more work is needed, we'll either move it back to in development, or in some cases, it may be a scope creep situation, or it's bigger than what was originally expected. Then we might create another story in the backlog in needs prioritization that has to get reviewed and prioritized for later. And then once it's ready to deploy, then we move it to deployed once we've actually deployed it. So team expectations. With all of the updating in Jira that has to happen, I wanted to make sure people had time to do it. So I have on the team, I blocked time on Mondays and Fridays from 2 to 4 and requested they don't schedule other meetings over it unless it's to talk to a teammate about a Jira story or a ticket. That's when the expectation is that they're reviewing and updating their current Jira stories and tickets, and also updating the ones that are open, and then reviewing and scoping the stories that are in need CRM review. And then, the other piece to this, we were also getting a lot of Teams messages and random requests coming in from our different stakeholder groups. So I set up, or had us, the team set up weekly stakeholder check-in meetings. So we do an admin meeting on Mondays, we have a check-in with UA, one with enrollment, and then we do other meetings with current students, just to make sure that we're trying to keep those conversations happening in that boxed meeting time instead of randomly throughout the rest of the week. And then we have agendas out there that, we ask people to put the agenda ahead of time or put items in the agenda ahead of time. And if they don't, then we'll cancel the meeting if there's nothing out there.
Great. So while Farrah was doing all of that organization, working with the team to evolve the process and setting documentation and all of those pieces that you just saw, I, on the other road, was working on our stakeholder ownership. So I recognized that we needed to get the CRM team directly out of that decision-making process for it and have the stakeholders have ownership in what was being worked on throughout each sprint. So we created a steering committee that is only made up of business users across the university who have a stake in Salesforce. Since we are all in one org, it was nice that we could bring them all to the table. So this is the purpose statement that we have. They have decision-making authority, and that we ask that they work through communication and trust to bring the university together around Salesforce. Again, this is a big shift, a change management shift, and we wanted them to be the champions for us. So in parallel to what Farrah was showing with some of the Jira processes, this is the sprint planning process that we do about every month, and Farrah does a wonderful job of outputting for the entire year all of the dates so that we have them readily available on the calendar, people are aware, and things are very consistent, so we get into a routine. So we start out with some type of request enhancement project, so the business unit decides that. Then we move it to a technical review so that the stories get scoped. We understand if we need some of those partner teams that Farrah was talking about, especially a lot of integration, data management, or any type of reviews that are needed. So that's the second step. Then we have a committee or committee meeting each month that then we prioritize the sprint itself. So I'll show a few more pictures about that and what that actually looks like. Then we execute the sprint and then review the sprint work and then basically start it all over each month. So it's a nice cycle so that we are always looking ahead to the next month on where our time is being spent. This is the commitment for each of the steering committee members. We have a virtual meeting a month, and we've actually gotten a lot more proficient as we've been going. We're coming up on 2 years of having this committee, and so we are moving at a much faster pace and less tactical and a little bit more strategic, and trust is there. So we also have a team chat that's set up so that if there are emergencies, if there are decisions that we need right away, they are always available to chat and talk and make those decisions among each other. And then Farrah and I execute based on the recommendation that they provide. And then we want to make sure that they are the point of contact if something is happening within Salesforce, that we can go to them, they can communicate out to their team and be our champion in that way. So right now we have 4 individuals who represent these areas. So again, from enrollment services all the way to university advancement, which is alumni. And then we have 2 representing our current students. The Center for Student Achievement is where retention happens. So we wanted to make sure they were at the table, and they have a lot of stake in the game as we build up the current students. And for anyone who's trying to build a steering committee, I would also say you have to come in there with a really positively pushing hand. So we talked to them about how we really need everybody to be trusting of each other, understand that we're evolving as a committee, but we're doing that together, and that you have to be bought into Salesforce. You can't come to the meeting and say what you're looking for and then go off and not support Salesforce in a outside meeting, or say anything that we should go with a different tool. We want you bought in. So luckily, our 4 representatives have been wonderful on that and really been champions for us, which has made a big difference. So this is what our steering committee intranet looks like, which is great, so that anytime someone has a request that's last minute, we actually get to now say, oh yeah, here's our steering committee. We will bring it up with them. So again, it takes the ownership off of the CRM technical committee and puts it on the business decisions to prioritize. So now we came back together, and let's get started with the sprints. So Farrah's going to go through some of that.
Yeah, so here it is. This is my calendar for next year. I do this every year in November, and then I run it by the steering committee and our team to make sure we didn't miss anything. And so we plan out. So one of the questions in the chat was about our methodology for, like, if we're agile. So the question is St. Thomas Information Technology using a scaled agile methodology, or are you guys able to decide which agile method you use within your own CRM related teams? And the answer is we are using a loosely agile model. So we have tried all different variations of sprints. No other area in IT is actually doing an actual agile methodology. So we're doing what works for us. So we have found with our stakeholders a monthly sprint is the best way to go. We do 2 deploys during that sprint. So you'll see I have a sprint start and end date. We have a final request deadline, which is for steering. We have a technical committee review. Then we have our sprint planning defined, and I've already scheduled those through the year. And then we have UAT deadlines and 2 deploy windows. And the other thing that we do is we do a combined November-December sprint every year, just because we usually do a sprint roll at the end of December or right before Christmas break. Our institution is usually closed for the holidays, so we have a nice 2-week break. So we like to roll Sandbox right before that, so that when we come back in January and kick off that next sprint, we have a nice new shiny Sandbox to work in. This also takes into account the Salesforce upgrades, so we're making sure that our timing is right. We did have an incident last year where we rolled staging after it had been upgraded, and then production got upgraded, and things were out of sync for a while. That was kind of messy. So anyway, so we have this very well defined. We have a Salesforce intranet page also, along with the steering committee page, and this is posted out there. So it's available for everyone to see. I also have the dates for the planned upgrades on that page. So I think it's really helpful to have that transparency.
So I know Amber also had a question here that I'll address too. So it was, who creates your backlog items and how do user requests get converted from help requests into a user story or backlog? So we use Jira, as you're seeing, for the management of our sprints. And then we have Team Dynamics, or TDX, which is our ticketing system or a service request system. And we have been testing out ways, and we have something successful and need to continue building on it, that it uses what's called iPass to actually grab the TDX ticket, move it, and create a ticket into Jira in our CRM review. So the CRM review bucket is always what gets viewed first, and then they decide if it goes to backlog, needs prioritization, and executes it based on Farrah's chart that she showed earlier. So we're trying to make sure that the CRM team has first view of those things going forward. Good question. Okay, so as we're going through the monthly sprints, we had to think about the total points and how we allocate those across our time and what's available from the team. So 60% of the points available per month go to business needs and what the steering committee actually get to decide. 20% of the points go towards the CRM maintenance. So the CRM team, if they're trying to keep something up or roll things, or there's a new error that we want to address, then we have actual time allocated to address those and not try and squeak them in when we can. And then the last one is actually something we learned over time, that we had to make time for emergencies, where like the CRM steering committee decided an emergency is anytime the system's down. So we really needed to make sure that if the system is down, it's kind of an all hands on deck. So each month we allocate extra time. And if it's not used, that's a wonderful win for all of us. And then we just allocate and grab stories as we can. But if you're building out something like this, work in the emergency process.
So here's the formula that I came up with, and it's been working pretty well. So I break down the team. I have different people on the team, and they can do different functions, right? So some I split between admin and advanced admin. Some are admin and BA. Like I have a breakdown per person of FTE count for each role, and then I sum that up. And then I use this formula. The other thing that I have set up is we have a team calendar, and I ask that everybody update vacation time on that team calendar, not because I want to micromanage when they're taking time off. We don't do an approval for that, but just because when we're doing sprint planning, if they're going to be out a couple of days, I need to factor that into the FTE count for the upcoming sprint.
So as we were going through this, we started asking the steering committee, could you prioritize, what you're looking for? So we asked them to pre-prioritize stories that mean the most to their area. So they do a 1 through 10, so it helps us understand what they're most interested in. And then we have found that it's best that we actually assemble a proposed sprint so that they have something to react to rather than wasting time for them to create it. And we're pretty sure we can get to a way that AI will do this for us. We just haven't, gone to the next maturity model in that. But we found that anything that's still in unit testing needs to roll over to the month. Those story points go towards the overall. Then we prioritize things that are in development because we want to keep cleaning out what we're already working on and not just keep bringing new stories that stay open month over month. And then the last things that get put into, if there are extra points available, are the top priorities that those stakeholders put. So it's really helpful for them to take some time to actually discuss what's the most important thing to us, and then for us to act on that, and then they can see the results coming out right away. So this is an example of what the stakeholder prioritization looks like. Across the top, you can see the different roles that Farrah talked about. So admin, advanced admin, developer, and then BA, and then the overall story points, and then each one, which rolls down into the summary. So we see how many available sprint points there are, how many are in UAT, what maintenance, and what emergency points. So it equates to a total requested of 189 points. And then the capacity is this gray one. So how much do we have available? And you can see that for this specific request or this sprint, we were over by 87 points. So that allows us to go back to the steering committee and say, which ones do we remove that were on there? And then if, they kind of go in the backlog, or if you want us to move forward with this, the expectation is we won't finish everything because we're over this. So again, it takes the pressure off of the team and sets the expectation earlier. And what's been really exciting about this is that we are able to do communications to leadership around where our time is being spent. So this is an example that we send out, and I know it's from last year, but still relevant in the template, that we show how much we had available, what we actually did, and if we were over or under story points. So did we over deliver? Did we meet expectation, or were we behind? And then we get to talk about each ones and link them to our various systems so people can see. And over time, we found that we can even say, I think it was like 60% of our time is going to enrollment, another 20 is going to 25 is going to students, and then the other 10, 15 is going to alumni. So we can really get down to the point of where we're spending our time, and there's no more questions. So this has been beneficial to bring transparency to the team, to have organization, and then hit all of those pain points that we talked about right at the beginning. So.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I didn't mention before is that when we're scoping stories, we're trying to keep that story so that it can be completed within that sprint. And if we find that it's going to be bigger than one sprint to get it done, we're breaking it up because our goal is to complete all of the allocated stories at the end of a sprint. A lot of times we get the development work done and they're maybe sitting in UAT, and so we have to finish those. But
great, and I see we have a few more questions too.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Dan, you had a question here.
Yeah,
so do committee members have terms? Do you allow for alternates? We don't have terms right now because if you're just starting, you want buy-in. And if someone is not participating or delivering in the first 3 months, then it's time to find someone different. I would say that. If they can't get it together in a quarter, then they will not be a champion outside of that meeting. That was not something that we had to deal with, but I can tell from other experiences that is the timeline I would give. We have had alternates come, especially if they know the prioritization of what stories are most important to them. So that's been helpful. And it gets more buy-in again for the overall goal. All right, which one you want next?
So the next one is, which resources would be helpful in empowering me with effective capability to develop and manage sprints? Really, you can use whatever tools you have. I use Jira because that's what we had, and I love Jira. And Excel, like those two resources have been really the biggest help. As you can see, we export a lot out of Jira. I had to do a lot of custom work in Jira to get it to do what I wanted. I learned how to create Jira automation so I could do roll-up summaries. I created a lot of custom fields. I created filters and views. And then, yeah, it's just exporting and figuring out a process. And I mean, it's still a work in progress. We're still, as we're working in it, finding things that we want to adjust. So it's just getting in there and trying things and seeing what works and taking in feedback from your team. I would say the best advice I would give is to define your process and then document it and share it out, because that way everyone is on the same page and knows what you're doing.
All right, next one. Who leads and manages the steering committee? So for this first year and a half-ish, I have been, because I am a little more removed from the day-to-day, and part of our goal was to make sure that Farrah and her team were viewed as the partner and not necessarily the decision maker too. So that's why I opened up the communication, did invite that way. And now we've gotten to a point of trust where Farrah will be taking over more of those pieces. So it's been a really nice transition. And it's, again, I would pick someone who has the ability to bring that people together and have less bias and just create that trust, and then be able to hand it to the CRM team. Not that the CRM team can do that, but when we're talking about being able to have the CRM team be a partner, I think that's the first step.
All right, and then the last question that we have so far, do you have a separate test QA group from your admin dev team? That's a great question. Sort of. Sometimes. So for enrollment, we do. For enrollment, enrollment is really huge. We're running all of our admissions applications and some non-admissions applications through Salesforce. So there's an enrollment technical team, and it's a team of BAs, and we work really closely with them. So actually, one of the questions earlier that asked how stories got into our backlog, that enrollment tech team actually will put stuff right into our backlog. We have weekly check-ins with them. We talk to them a lot. I think some of them are actually in the session right now. But so they are doing a lot of the testing. So that's great that we have them, and I wish we had that same for all of the business areas we support, but unfortunately we don't. For current student, we do have a couple of people that we work with, and so when we're building something for them, we hand it off for testing, but our team ends up doing the bulk of the testing just because they're not as comfortable with the technology as maybe our enrollment partners are. And then on the advancement side, we do have a couple of folks that we work with, and they're actually what I would call delegated admins in the system. So they're doing some light admin work and some development in our test environments. And so they are working closely with us for UAT. So, we have a couple of groups we work with that are sort of like a QA team, but they're not a dedicated QA team. They are doing other parts of their job, but they are helping us with testing.
Great.
All right.
I think the only other question we've gotten before is how long did it take you to get this up and running? So it took Farrah and I would say 3 months of like fully getting this all organized and stood up, and then it took a full year for that steering committee to really be more tactical and or strategic and providing more direction. And so that gives you a little timeline for you.
Mm-hmm. And it's always a work in progress, right? I've been talking to the team the last few weeks, and we have some thoughts on changes that we're going to implement starting in the new year. So, if I give this presentation next year, then it might be slightly different.
Yes.
When do you use user acceptance testing versus straight internal QA? Always. We a lot of the stuff we're doing is public facing because we have Experience Cloud, or a lot of staff will use it. So we almost always have someone do some form of UAT before we will move it to production. The only time we do internal QA is if it's something that we're working on, like if we are rebuilding, someone on the team has been going through some of our flows and making revisions because we've built onto them so long, or we might have multiples that we're able to combine them down. So in that case, we'll still probably pull in people for some UAT, but we might do the bulk of the testing because it's something we're working on. So the steering committee does not help with end user support or training. They are just doing prioritization. They are mostly leadership that are on the steering committee. They have people that report to them that are doing the user training and end user support, and some of them are delegated admins in the system, the people that report to the steering committee members. But for the most part, the steering committee folks are more leadership roles. Great questions.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, I think if you have more questions, always feel free to reach out to Farrah or myself anytime. We love helping, and hope that you can take this and implement it right away. Yeah, I've got one more slide, right? Questions. There's our contact if you want to reach out for further information. And I know there's the last slide for the next steps too.
Rita's asking when I will teach people to hack Jira. Maybe I should offer that as a hands-on session next time.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks everyone.